So the book is chock full of revelations, big and small. But I'm going to turn it to you. What were the things that you found while you were covering the race where you said, "Ooh, I'm going to keep that for the book," even though I kind of am tempted to share it with people now? Like, what were like the surprises that you saw, that you kind of held for publication that everyone would have been excited about at the time?
Well, again, some of this I knew because I knew it and held on to it, and some of it I only found out about early out because I was reporting it on these embargo rules. And I think the best example is one of the very first things that I got that I knew would end up in the book was the scene that's in there of Kamala Harris deciding to run for president. And it's a meeting that she has in New York with all of her campaign team and her sister, who's her closest advisor and brother-in-law there. And they go through the presentations about fundraising and the schedule and how it's all going to go. And that's interesting in itself. But the moment I just knew would be great to have is it ends with a moot court, because Harris really is like a lawyer deep in how she thinks about things. And so they have Mark Elias, who's the Democratic lawyer, does a lot of election law challenges. He does the case for running. And he does this whole big speech, which ends with him saying, "The house of our democracy is on fire and we need you to be there." Okay. Then they turn to Tony West, Harris's brother-in-law, to do the case against running. And because he's family, they figure he can go at her pretty hard. And he does, and says she hasn't been in the Senate for long enough, and she was, all these things she did as a prosecutor were terrible. And they were betrayal of Black people, and they were betrayal of progressives, and blah, 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 blah. All things that ended up being real factors during the campaign for her. And he hits her hard, and they're all sitting there thinking like, "Oh shit." glad he, as the brother-in-law, raised all this. And she looks at him and she goes, "Yeah, I like some motherfuckers up." And as I point out in the book, she now Vice President Harris, motherfucker is like her favorite word, and she will correct people if they put the R's into it. So that's how she said it. And as I was watching the attacks go on about her record as a prosecutor, of course, as a reporter, you want to say like, "Hey, I have this super juicy thing, and this is how she talked about it, and this is how she dismissed it," but I couldn't use it. I'm glad that it was there for the book, because I think it's interesting even in retrospect. And so that really was, again, I had a separate notebook that I was keeping of stuff that was for the book. And that was in the notebook by January of 2019, wow. In full, and the whole scene of it. Parts of it were in earlier. There were other things too that really surprised me. I mean, I think one of the ones, because it ended up being so relevant, also kind of relates to the vice presidential process, but knowing just how rough and vicious things got between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and then knowing the story that's in the book of how Warren, once she decides to drop out, is stressing about what to do with her endorsement, with the idea that she wants Bernie Sanders to not be the nominee, and she wants Joe Biden to be the nominee at that point. And whether for her the right calculated move is to endorse Sanders so that she can have the credibility to then call on him to drop out a week or two later, or whether it's to endorse Biden so that she can give him the progressive boost. And in the end, she didn't endorse anybody. She just made no decision. But she's having these like conversations with her staff, with other people, with Barack Obama. It's all going on. But when it comes time for the Biden to think about a vice presidential nominee, Warren really wants it. And what would have really helped her at that moment is Bernie Sanders saying, "Hey, I think you should consider Elizabeth it would mean a big deal, a great deal to me, to my supporters. It would be a way to draw everybody in. And Sanders is so pissed about everything that went on that he won't say it, and he won't even bring up her name. And he kept on saying, "Oh, when he was talking to Biden, and they were talking a fair amount, he would say, "Oh, well, we're not. I don't bring up the vice presidential stuff," and that was his way of not saying anything good or bad about Warren, because he didn't want to trash her, but he could have helped her, and he decided not to. And maybe she would have been the vice presidential nominee otherwise. There were some other concerns the Biden team had, including that she would sort of reinforce the idea that Biden looked old. But that, especially, and that stuff I started to really get a sense of during the vice presidential selection process. So that was over the summer. I was doing some reporting, and people would send me, "I can tell you this part, but you can't use this until later."
The Bernie Warren interplay was fascinating in your book. Like that, there was a real blow by blow, even in the beginning when they're each deciding to run, they're taking each other's temperature. Like that sounds fascinating. And I've obviously been around both of them, like a dozen times. I've seen them interact with each other.
Would you describe them as friendly?
They're very cordial colleagues. That they're like there's definitely a high degree of familiarity. I feel like the warmth might have gone up and down over the time. Like,
no, but what you're getting at it, like, that's it, right? And the chapter in the book is called "Not Friends," the first chapter about Warren and Sanders, right? Like, because they're not. You'd think that they maybe are, but they're not. And they're like gaming each other out over the course of 2018 to see which one was going to run for president. Ultimately, deciding, I don't care, I'm running. I don't care what he does, or I don't care what she does, I'm running. It comes to a head in a way at this dinner that Warren invites Sanders over to her apartment in Washington. And like, one of the funny details in the book to me is that Sanders afterwards would tell people that Warren cooked for him. And Warren ordered in Italian. He said, "Oh, she made lasagna for me." And like, that was a much more significant thing that happened at that dinner. That's the dinner where people may remember it blew up later, that Warren heard him say, basically, he didn't think a woman could win. He says that what he said about it was that he was saying it would be hard for a woman to run and win. But even just in the deep details of it, of like how these people relate to each other, and Warren she's not much of a cook. So, but Sanders is assuming, "Oh, this Italian food that's here, she must have made it for me."
It was wild for me, Isaac, because like the first couple of times I was around various candidates, like there were different levels of receptivity to me, where initially they just didn't know who I was. Like that happened, but then like over time they became familiar with me, and there's like a degree of collegiality that would get built up. But I remember the first time I met Elizabeth Warren, I was in a room, and when you're a candidate, there are certain levels of energy around you where, like, you come in a room and then people really want to talk to you. And so the first time I was in the same room as Elizabeth Warren was like a fairly big Democratic event in one of the states. I think it might have been South Carolina. And then all these people like flocked to her because she was Elizabeth Warren and a big deal. And at the time I was not a big deal. So candidates would like Bigfoot each other all the time that way, not intentionally necessarily, like, they just come in and everyone cared. And so like the first time I was around Elizabeth, she didn't really have much sense of who I was. And I think it was really only after the debate started getting going that they would start to pick up on who some of the other candidates were. But the watching people interact with each other was fascinating for me, like it was for everyone else, where you'd see something going on in the press and then you'd see the people interact individually.
Well, I feel like for you had this strange experience where you didn't know any of these people beforehand, so you were sort of like a spectator of like getting to know all these people, like a lot of America was. But on the other hand, you were there. You were on the debate stage. You were in backstage at these events. You were, because your candidacy was starting to pull together. And certainly, I mean, like when it became the moment when it became clear to me that you were going to be something that was a significant part of the race was the debate in Detroit, the second debate, when I'm going to get your exact phrasing wrong, but there was a question about climate change, and you said, well, maybe we need to consider moving to higher ground, right? Which was this very, in some ways, dark, nihilistic way of looking at things, but also very practical minded, because your point was we spend a lot of time talking about climate change, and like we're talking and talking and talking, and the climate keeps changing, right? And I think that the reaction that generated to me was really fascinating. But it still, I think for a lot of the other candidates, you were not, it took a little bit longer for them to plug into the fact that this was something that was really going to catch.